As reported on the site crn.com.au recently, ASIC, for just the second time in its history, launched civil proceedings against an organization that experienced a data breach. In this case, it was FIIG Securities, a fixed income investment firm, over what was claimed to be inadequate cybersecurity measures maintained over a 4-year period. So, being just the second ever cybersecurity enforcement action by ASIC, it signals a significant shift in how cyber risk is being treated under Australian financial services law. And in ASIC's words, it was a wake-up call, not just for FIIG, but for any company, not just financial service sector companies, entrusted with sensitive client data. So the regulator alleges in this specific case that the failings allowed an attacker to access FIIG's network undetected for weeks in 2023, stealing 385 gigabytes. Gigabytes, Ross, or gigabits? Gigabytes.
Gigabytes, yeah.
Gigabits would be much less, I imagine, of sensitive client data and leaking it onto the dark web. Around 18,000 clients were affected. So in this episode, I've brought on Ross, of course, the CEO of First Focus, to help me explore what adequate cybersecurity measures look like in this case, but really, as this doesn't just apply to FIIG or financial service sector organization in any business in Australia or New Zealand, who bears responsibility when it goes wrong, and now that we see that ASIC is pursuing civil action, what do the potential consequences look like? So Ross, having brought you in, positioned you as the subject matter expert, put you in the hot seat, should we start with what adequate security measures look like in practice? What actual, hands-on things, what tangible things need to be done for, even if something goes wrong, because nothing's foolproof, what are the standards? What does adequate look like?
Look, I think that's actually one of the challenges here, because there's not one answer to that. And people get rightly, I think, confused about, okay, but isn't there just a list that tells me what I should do? And unfortunately, there kind of isn't. And it's the biggest challenge, right? And I think that while there are countless frameworks and guidelines and things that exist, there isn't here's just a list of things. And so, even when you took Essential 8 maturity model is obviously a good, probably more example of one that is actually quite specific. But there's a bunch of things even in this scenario that went outside probably that. And so when you look at, whether it's ISO or NIST, all these frameworks, they provide some level of guidelines, but it's really still a case of you assessing what risk is appropriate in your scenario. And that's where people fall down. And I know, we have a lot of clients in the financial services sector. They don't all interpret it the same. And so, while there is a bunch of things that you should be doing, there's certainly no, here, just follow this list and you'll be fine.
Right, because if you look at the law under the Corporations Act 2001 here, there's things such as Section 912A1A to do, the obligation to do all things necessary to ensure that financial services are provided efficiently, honestly, and fairly, which is interpreted to mean that you need to protect clients from cyber risks and ensure continuity of integrity of services, which in practice maybe means that you must take cybersecurity seriously as part of doing all things necessary. There is no clear, concise.
It's not, and there's and the word reasonable is used a lot of times, and that makes it hard. And so, okay, having a firewall, is that enough? Well, no, not anymore, because you can have a firewall. Is it updated? Is it licensed to the latest and complete version of your intrusion prevention and all these kinds of things? And then who's actually looking at it? Who's monitoring it? Who's making sure? And so just having it isn't enough. It's a case of what you're doing about it. And that's the case in this scenario, I think, where there was stuff that just wasn't being monitored, looked at. It was quite clear there was evidence of things happening, and I think they even just ignored the reach out from the ASD or whoever, ACSC for a while as well, right? So
that
not
going to make you friends.
And so it was. Yeah, so, when you go to things like vulnerability scanning and system hardening, and if you've got a SIEM in place, to actually collate all the events, who's looking at the SIEM, are you patching things? There's a lot of stuff. I mean, they even get called out. They didn't have an incident response plan. There are a lot of things that were identified here. But I keep coming back to the frameworks exist that specify the risks you should be assessing within your business, but it's not an easy how-to guide to actually solve them. And that's where we come in. We kind of obviously have that. We can, hey, I just want to tick a box, and then we handle all that. But then, the conversation I'm having with customers now is, okay, well, we need to have confidence that you're then doing those components, because we are obviously outsourcing that risk to you guys, right? And so that's a conversation that's coming up more and more as well.
So, okay, the ambiguity in the law is exactly why the framework such as Essential 8 exists, because it gives an industry-wide understanding of what good looks like in practice. And then the other one is it isn't a set and forget. It is a continual process of it's ongoing. It isn't.
It's ongoing. It's definitely not set and forget, because just because you made a cybersecurity investment in 2024 doesn't mean you don't have to do something again in 2025. So it's certainly not a solve once and you've solved it forever. Okay,
I think the next thing then, let's talk about legal versus operational accountability. Something goes wrong in the scenario, the company itself is legally accountable for meeting the obligations under the Corporations Act. So presumably at a board level, that's where
it's corporation. There's Privacy Act. A lot of Privacy Act stuff comes into this as well, because that's where often it comes down to is that PII, the personal information that actually is what you're in charge with protecting. And I'd say the potential, the liability on that is probably greater than a lot of the other. Like we talk about, it's not so much the cybersecurity itself that's the issue; it's the personal information that you're actually protecting. And so then there can be some quite big penalties for breaches of Privacy Act, and that's more than just cybersecurity related, right? Like if you leave everyone's credit cards on the front desk in your office, that's as bad as as well, right? So there's physical things as well you need to be doing, but they have increasingly now brought through for newer legislation now to kind of bring a bit more clarity over from a cybersecurity perspective what the responsibilities are and who is responsible. And very much directors now have that direct responsibility, as well as management teams within organizations. So if they are not doing what is, again, reasonable, then there is now more of a personal liability, not just the company.
I would assume that the vast majority of directors understand the onus that is on them. How well do you think they understand, though, how they can mitigate those risks or undertake that compliance piece?
How well do they understand it?
I go back to my own experience reporting to a board. Yeah, mixed, I would say. I think there's still, particularly there's always been an understanding of sort of workplace health and safety compliance and risk. And as that's
and financial, you got to do your tax return, you got to pay your super, you've got to those, and I think it comes back to the same thing though. Those things, there's a checklist of things that says that you have to do what you need to do, and I don't think the cybersecurity world is certainly evolving too fast and also too new to have those kinds of things ready to go. And so it is an evolving space for directors. I think there is a lot more questions being asked. Frameworks, as I said, are the closest thing that exists to having something that says, yes, we follow this framework, or yes, we have, we have been independently audited, whether it's ISO or other things like that. But the level of awareness and education is mixed, and I think boards should be doing more to become educated on these things.
Maybe that's an opportunity for us in the event space is to help boards, upskill in this space and provide some guidance. So I'll make that note.
And because I know that when we're talking to organizations, we're generally not talking directly to, we're talking to someone else who's having to relay stuff to a board, and it does seem like sometimes they're one layer too far removed from the conversation, but they're the ones that are liable. Yeah,
which means that scenario makes zero sense. So okay, all right. I want to move to the last part of this conversation, which is the potential risk. We know who's at risk. We know what needs to be done to mitigate the risk. So what happens if that isn't done and those people do cop it?
Yeah, it depends what's actually happened, and again, which act you've actually, the issue is under. I know with privacy there can be quite big penalties in terms of, I think it's up to 30% of revenue. I think is generally the cap.
Wow. Okay.
But in some ways, it was disappointing to see how much actually had to go wrong in an example like this for them to take action. But also good to see that it is happening. But this was after, this wasn't just for being open to the risk occurring. This was because it actually did occur, right? So there are two scenarios here. What's the penalty for doing nothing? Well, there's kind of no penalty for doing nothing unless something happens, right? And then there can be quite.
There's no auditing, and that leads to some sort of enforcement. It is, if it goes really wrong, you ignore requests for insights. You then, by the looks of it, this has taken the better part of 2 years for action to be taken against them as a result of that incident. So essentially, you're saying, in theory, the potential penalties can be quite severe, but they appear to be rather toothless because of the, I guess, all of the. I'm looking for a word here that I'm really struggling to find, but essentially the fact
it's all very new again, and I think that everyone's kind of working it out. Even the legislation in the cybersecurity space is very new.
Caveats, by the way, caveats was the word I was looking for.
Caveats, yeah. And so often there are at the industry specific level, there are different. If you take financial services or healthcare, or there are specific sectors that obviously have some more. Much more detailed requirements, and those bodies that oversee those sectors are often the ones that they might have a specific standard or governance around, and that's probably where I see day to day more of those conversations occurring, is because they do have to report back. And here you got an example where in that sector, a company was obviously still sliding under the radar in terms of what they were reporting back in terms of what they were doing, because in financial services you do have to provide evidence of this stuff, right? So and yet still it was sort of sliding under the radar. So I think a lot more has to happen in terms of auditing and assessment and standards to adhere to, and we are seeing that in the US now. I think it'll be interesting to see if that follows here, where you actually have a mandated standard.
Yeah, and I think two other things. One, yes, there's the penalties that can come from enforcement action, but there's the actual cost to your business of just lost clients. I mean, in the case of the financial services business, 18,000 clients with their data leaked, that doesn't leave a 5-star review. That is a bad scenario. So I would argue that that's probably the biggest risk, the most tangible. They didn't need to have enforcement taken against them for those clients, presumably to have looked at other options for their investments. And I think probably the other thing I take from this story on CRN is the language used by ASIC. I think they're trying to signal that times are changing. That was the perception, that this is the start, or at least they're wanting it to get people thinking more about what if. So whether that's just words, whether that's action, what will come next, we'll see.
Yeah, that's right. Because the loss of customers and the impact to you take the big ones over the previous years of Optus and Medibank. I mean, if you looked at it now, will we say Medibank has less customers? I don't know. I don't think anyone really. Yeah, and so once you pass that news cycle, and people have forgotten. I mean, I heard someone the other day just complaining about a health provider, and someone was suggesting Medibank because they cover XYZ, right? Like, it wasn't a conversation about, don't go to Medibank because they're not safe with your data. So, I think it does get forgotten about. I think the difference here is that, like I said, if you're personally holding directors liable, and then they now can't be a director and things like that, that's the change here. Is, I think, not just taking action against a company, but actually starting to take potential action against individuals.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, great place to leave it. If there are other conversations you'd like Ross and I to dive into, other scenarios or industry news, we'd be happy to do that. Leave a comment in the section of whatever platform you're watching this on. Otherwise, Ross, I'll leave you to it, and I'll catch you next time there's something interesting to chat about.